Okay, well, thank you for coming, everybody. For those that didn't get it, I'm Kevin Magee. I'm a local diver. I'm a member of CLUE, the Cleveland Underwater Explorers, which actually finds some of the shipwrecks. In fact, the Sultan was found by CLUE, originally by Rob Ridgely, but then CLUE followed up. I'm a member of MAST, the Maritime Archaeological Survey team, and in fact, that is the adventure there. That was the very first shipwreck that was surveyed in Ohio waters with an archaeological survey, and that's now their logo. It's avocational divers that do Ohio shipwreck surveys. Every year they go out and do a survey on a ship. Right now they're working on the city of Concord off of Huron, Ohio, which is a steamer. And then of course, the National Museum of the Great Lakes. Also, that used to be the Inland Seas Museum in Vermilion. I don't know how many people are there. Very cute little museum, but they weren't getting a lot of foot traffic, so they moved to Toledo, rebranded themselves. The museum is bigger and better. I strongly recommend going and visiting it. You could spend all day there. Plus they have a museum ship, a museum tug, and they're just finishing up an expansion with a bridge attached to the museum from another ship. So it's really well worth it if you're into maritime history. They start with the Great Lakes and canoes and go all the way to modern day. So it really covers a breadth of history. Anyway, I'm here today to talk about the Cornelia B. Windiate. That's that ship you see right there. It's a classic canal schooner. I'll get into what that means in a bit. And before I talk about this ship, I should talk a little bit about this man. This is Thomas Windiate, which you can probably guess how he might be associated with the ship. He was actually born in England in 1827. And then when he was 12 years old, his family immigrated from England to the United States. And they settled in Pontiac, Michigan, which is not unusual. A lot of westward expansion at the time. At the time, that was kind of the frontier. This is new territory, and people are moving in and setting up families and businesses and things like that. He met and married Cornelia Elizabeth Wallace when he was about 20-something years old. She was 8 years his junior. She was 18 years old when she got married in 1852, and now he has a family. He needs to start a business. So what he did is he began a livery business. A livery business, of course, horses were the main transportation back then, and so this was his business. He boarded, bedded, and took care of horses. I understand he actually even got out into doing a little bit of ride sharing with that business, even though liveries mostly just take care of horses, which was a very popular business back then. After a couple of years, though, he made a big decision. He decided to move from his family home in Pontiac all the way across Lake Michigan over to Manawak. It was a big trip. I'm sure it took him a while to get there in 1854. Probably a boat was involved. Overland was really tough to go in those days. And he continued his livery business. He set up one there. And his family started to thrive. He started to thrive. Just a year later, he purchased the only hotel in the town. It was called the National Hotel. He purchased the hotel and its grounds. And you could see that he started to take off in a business standpoint. A few years later, in 1857, he decided he needed a bigger, better hotel, a brick one. And so what he did is he started building this house, Windiate House. It was a brick hotel, which at the time was top of the line. Now you notice it took a while for him to do that, because guess what happened after he started building it? Fire. Civil War. And so people were distracted, materials were hard to get, workers were hard to get. So it wasn't done until 1864. But if you have any doubts about whether or not this is the Windiate Hotel, if you look at the front right here, it actually says Windiate House. And they always put a period after things. I love how things change over time. But everybody put a period, even if it was just Windiate House, period. Really cute in my mind. Nevertheless, this became the social center of Manawak. This is where movers and shakers would go, hang out. He was starting to become an integral part of the community. And in fact, it was said that he was the ever-popular host, and he made friends with any person who placed their name on the register to check into the Windiate House. He was a mover and a shaker, and it showed. He became pretty much the business leader, or one of the business leaders, the founding fathers really, even though the town already existed, and at any one time was managing 5 or 6 interests. He directed a lot of the leading enterprises. Inestimable value in building and upbuilding the city, and he owned the express and stage lines, in addition to the livery service and the hotels. And he also was instrumental in securing the railroad to come there when it finally came there. He built the high school, he built the original harbor piers, and he purchased locations for the original dry docks and the grain elevators. So you can see he was a really important part of the town. He was really going at it. And a lot of different interests, a lot of different businesses. But he wasn't done. In 1870, he decided he should take on a new interest. You notice a lot of these have to do with transportation. And that's what he decided to do. Now, this is what the town looked like, what was it? I think it was around 1868. So 2 years before he started his new business, this is what the town looked like. You can actually see the harbor piers right here that he helped build. And what he did is he decided he was going to get into shipbuilding. He was going to build ships because that seems like a natural extension. Now, he wasn't a sailor himself, so he partnered with another person, a well-established captain, James Butler, who was in the maritime business and knew about ships and building ships. And they started a business, and they started building a shipbuilding center. It took a few years, but, and I'm not going to give it away yet, guess what his first ship was? And if you guess Windiate, you get it wrong. Now, this is his first ship, the Trumpf. I've heard that name before. I don't know where. It's actually German for triumph, in case you're wondering what that name means. And it was a three-masted canal schooner. It was actually launched in 1873, so it took about 3 years to get the shipyard up and going and to produce the first ship. Classic canal schooner. What that means is the schooner is sized to fit into the Welland Canal locks with the maximum cargo capacity. The Welland, of course, went through many different iterations. Now this would be a very tiny boat in the locks, but in the 1860s, this was as big as you could get in the locks and still make it through the Welland Canal. And 3 masts, fast for the time. This is before steamers really became common. And this was the main way cargo got around the Great Lakes. This is how you did it. Sail and schooners pretty much ruled the lakes. And there would be hundreds of them, even 1,000 of them on the lakes at any one season. This was a major commercial enterprise. And in 1874, the year after its launch, it did something no other ship had done. It actually traveled from Lake Michigan through the Welland Canal, through the St. Lawrence, which at the time was treacherous, lots of rapids and things like that, and out into the Atlantic and delivered the very first cargo from the Great Lakes to Europe. Interesting enough, it was bone dust. I wouldn't think that's a valuable cargo, but apparently Ireland needed it, and they did the very first trip. Yeah, it's not something you think of as a major thing, but it can get a little wet, no problem. So, and it was a brand new ship, so it had A1 rating for commercials, for insurance. And so it did that. It was out for about 2 years, but then it came back into the Great Lakes, made the trip in reverse, which again is no easy feat. And from 1876 all the way to 1917, it sailed all over the Great Lakes. This ship really was successful. It finally went back out into the Atlantic in 1917, and 2 years later foundered in a storm off of Labrador, becoming a loss. And this ship was almost 50 years old when it sank, which for a wooden sailing vessel is really unusual. Yeah?
How many men did it take to operate that?
The question is, how many men did it take to operate? Usually 7 to 8 was this crew size for a schooner, three-masted schooner. Now, that's actually important because there were other sailing rigs. You notice it doesn't have any square rigging. Square rigging took a lot more people to run. You need a crew size around 10, and you got to pay those people. So schooners became the preferential thing for the Great Lakes, especially since you're always changing directions. And a schooner or gaff rig like this, it's much easier to trim the sail, sail into the wind, and all the other things that a square rigger can't do. Square riggers are faster, and they're great for the ocean when you just have to sail in one direction a long time. But in the Great Lakes, if you sail in one direction too long, you hit shore, and you're constantly changing direction. So it was about a crew of 7 to 8. In this case, I know that the Windiate had 8 crew on it when things kind of went awry. So anyway, this was a very successful schooner. And the very next thing, right after they launched it in 1873, he started work on his next ship. And that was the Windiate. It was the Cornelia B. Windiate, March of 1873, right after the Trumpf left the slip. They started work. They laid the keel. This is the enrollment for it. It gives all the pertinent information, dimensions, rated tonnage, down to 39/100ths of a ton. This was actually very classic. You see it's a schooner rig. It's owned by Thomas Windiate along with James Butler. And this is how we know about ships. When we find them, this is where you get information about what type of rig is it, dimensions, all that stuff. And they said that it would cost about $22,000 to build her, which doesn't seem like a lot of money today, but you got to remember in the mid-1870s, that was a lot of money. But he was more than willing to do it because this thing would make a lot more money in return over the years. It was launched the next year in April of 1874. Classic canal schooner dimensions, a little different than its sister ship, but pretty much a sister ship of the Trump. And it was named for his daughter, Cornelia Windiate. She was born in 1868, so she was about 5 years old when the ship was launched. And that's where she gets her name from. And this is what she looked like. Now again, all the pictures I'm going to show you are the sister ship because there are no pictures of the Windiate. Photography was brand new. It's just at the end of the Civil War, and there aren't a whole lot of photographers out there. But because the Trump was so long-lived, there's lots of photographs of her. So we're going to pretend this is the Windiate because they look virtually identical. And you got the three masts. You got the foremast, the mainmast, the mizzenmast, the cabin at the stern, long bowsprit and jib boom with the head sails on it, the jibs. The spar right here we're going to talk about, that's actually a Rafie spar, and it was a big triangular sail that was kind of unique to the Great Lakes. You don't find that anywhere else in the world, just in the Great Lakes. And then the topmasts above the cross trees, or some people call them crow's nests, but they're really cross trees, and the topmasts above it, which you could put additional sail on as well. So classic schooner. They don't build them like this anymore. It's a shame. So the Windiate actually operated successfully for 2 years. 1874 for the season she was launched, and in 1875. And again, you see a sailing vessel being towed. It's the Trump again. And in 1875, Thomas Windiate decided to sell her toward the end of the season. Probably wanted to focus on other interests. It does take a lot of time and effort to run a ship. And unfortunately, whoever bought it, which was C.C. Barnes, was not a really good captain, or did not put a good captain on the ship. It then suffered an unfortunate series of accidents very quickly after 2 years of pretty much flawless operation. In November of 1875, toward the end of the season, which is about the time she was sold, she collided with another schooner, the San Jacinto, breaking her jib boom. The jib boom is that long boom you see here that holds the head sails, extends out the bowsprit. And very quickly, days later, the headgear, which is pretty much the bowsprit, was damaged by the barge Sandusky. And she was in Milwaukee at the time. And so they had to make some quick repairs because they were going to do one more run for the final end of the season. You know, the gales in November, do you really want to go sailing in November? Well, the temptation was strong. Grain was still needing to be delivered from that season's harvest. And if you could just make one more delivery, you'll make a lot of money, especially if you pack on 22,000 bushels, which is more than she's rated for. And that's what they did. They packed her full of grain and set out from Milwaukee. Now, they did make temporary repairs to the bowsprit and the jib boom, but we'll see they may not have been very good. And they figured, you know, over the winter we'll repair them. Let's just do this one final run. It was a bitterly cold November already. She set out from Milwaukee, headed for Buffalo, 21,000 bushels of wheat, and November 27th is the day she left the harbor. And that's pretty much the last time anybody saw the Windiate. So what happened? Well, that was a big mystery. So we know she left Milwaukee, heading up Lake Michigan, and she was headed for the Straits of Mackinac up here, which separates Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. Fun fact, technically, these are the same lake. They're at the exact same level. There's no river or anything like that. But historically, we always call them two lakes. They're really one lake connected at the Straits of Mackinac, a very narrow division with a lot of traffic going through it. And right after, about a day or two after she left, a huge storm hit. Massive storm, lasted for a week. ships everywhere, wrecked. Some were frozen in place out in the lake, miles offshore, and people frozen inside the lake. And they could not get out of the boats. They had to axe their way out because they were literally encased in ice. And some of the crews actually had to walk miles to shore to save themselves because nobody was going to save them. The ice, if it didn't sink the ship, made it really hard to get around. And you can see this ship's completely encased in ice. Here's another steamer completely covered in ice in Duluth. You can imagine how hard it would be to operate a ship with all that ice on it. Now, nobody knows what happened to the Windiate, but I guarantee it probably looked like this during the storm. This is a sailing vessel with ice on it. And you can see it would be very hard to operate anything. Everything is frozen in place. All the equipment, the lines, the shrouds, the sails. That's very tough. It's tough enough for a steamer. For a sailing vessel, it would be very, very tough to operate. And nobody really knew what happened. She just disappeared. People started to speculate. She did not obviously make it to her destination. And pretty soon they began to say that, well, she's lost. And of course they didn't know where she was. There was a lot of speculation. But Captain Magee and the 8 crew were never seen again. There was actually one extra person aboard that probably shouldn't have been there, but there they were. And it was not reported as passing through the Straits of Mackinac. So how many people have been to the Straits of Mackinac? You can see the other side. They've got the fort there. They've got Mackinac City there. A lot of traffic comes and goes. And there were people, lighthouse keepers, that kept track of the ships as they came through. The Windiate was never seen. It, as far as they knew, never made it through the Straits. So they didn't think it was in Lake Huron. It was most likely somewhere in Lake Michigan. And a passing steamer on December 11th reported seeing topmasts sticking out of the water near the Fox Islands, which are on the approach to the Straits of Mackinac. And so it pretty much became lore that that's where the Windiate sank, was the Fox Islands. It was decided she was lost in northern Lake Michigan near the Fox Islands with the loss of her whole crew. And of course, that winter, that storm pretty much ended the season. Those masts were gone by the next season. The ice took them down. And its location was pretty much lost forever. They did wait till the spring, but eventually the enrollment was surrendered for the Windiate. It was surrendered on March 31st, 1876 in Milwaukee, and it was declared a total loss. And that would be pretty much the end of the story, except for these two guys. So flash forward about 100 years to the 1980s. And in 1986, these two gentlemen, Paul E. Horn and John Steele, two very, very famous shipwreck hunters from the 1970s and 80s, were out looking for a ship called the Norman. It's a big steel steamer. And they knew it was lost off of Presqu'île, Michigan, in Lake Huron, not Lake Michigan. And they had some pretty good research. They started searching, and within a few minutes, they found their target. In 210 foot of water, John Steele here went for a quick dive, which is amazing. It was air at the time. It was more or less a bounce dive, but he did it. And he said, yep, that's the Norman. Check the box. This is what the Norman looks like today. It's a huge steel steamer, broken right forward of the engine room. I've dove it several times. There's a lifeboat off of it, beautiful standing masts. You can look in through the engine skylight, see the engine, and drinking fountains on the wall, still filled with water. It's a diver joke. Yeah, R. Beautiful ship. So they checked the box, but you know what? They just had gotten started. They got plenty of gas. So John decided he's going to take a nap because he kind of did a pretty extreme dive, especially in those days on air, and decided he was going to sleep. So Paul took over the helm and kept searching. Let's see what else is out here. We got time. The weather's good. And within an hour or so, he found another target in 185 foot of water. And they're using side scan sonar, essentially, to find it. And so Paul gets geared up, goes down, and he actually missed it on the way down. He's following the anchor line down, and he gets to mud bottom. And you got to remember, he's at 185 feet in air. And for those that came in late, air is very narcotic beyond 100 foot. So he's a little loopy already. And he turns around, comes up, and there's this big wooden ship in front of him. And staring at him in the face is this name board that says Cornelia B. Windiate on it. And that's it. they found the Windiate. And of course, the problem is they found it in the wrong lake. When they got back to shore and said, Cornelia B, Windiate, what is this? Well, it's not even supposed to be here. It's supposed to be in Lake Michigan. What is it doing here in Lake Huron? And so it was found, and I would surmise, by the way, if it hadn't been for that name board, we would still be calling it a mystery ship today, because it's in the wrong lake, the wrong place, and it's a canal schooner. There's lots of ships that have roughly the same dimensions. But thanks to this name board right here, and I'm going to show you, this is your first look at the shipwreck. But if you look closely, you can see, and I'll kind of outline it there. You can kind of see Windiate. It's carved into it's actually carved in. It's not painted, it's carved into the wood. It's a big name board right there on the stern next to the cabin. And if it hadn't been for this, we would still not know what it is today, because it's nowhere near what it was supposed to be. And so the question is, what happened? Well, one mystery was solved, but now we have another mystery. So it was thought to have sunk near the Fox Islands, and instead, it did make it through the Straits of Mackinac. Nobody sighted it. Probably in that storm, it just wasn't visible. Somehow it made it through, despite all that ice and everything, and it actually made it all the way down to Presqu'île, just north of Thunder Bay and Alpena, and then sank for unknown reasons. And no sign of the crew at all, anywhere. And no sign of damage to the ship. So we kind of have a new mystery. This wreck is in perfect condition. This is about as perfect of a shipwreck as you can get. And you'll see that in a bit. So why did it sink? And where are the crew? Why are they not aboard? There should have been bodies or something, but nothing. The ship is a bit of a mystery, and it's in the wrong lake. So when divers find a new shipwreck, word spreads quickly. And its location was still secret. John and Paul did not like talking about where things were, but the locals eventually did figure it out. And it kind of became a myth in the diver world. You gotta remember this in the 1980s, 1990s. At the time, what's called technical diving didn't really exist yet. It was just coming into infancy. What technical diving is for recreational diving, when you get to 130 foot, you're pretty much done, because you only have a few minutes there, and then you have to go up or you go into decompression. Plus, like I mentioned earlier, beyond 100 foot, air becomes narcotic. And so you get a little loopy. And if you're going to dive a shipwreck in 185 feet of water, you can't normally get there unless you do special things. You have redundant equipment, double tanks with regulators. If one free flows, you valve it off and go to the other regulator. You have to do decompression, which usually means carrying other cylinders with 50% oxygen, 100% oxygen, so that you can decompress out quicker. They call it accelerated decompression. You need a lot of special equipment, dry suits and things like that, not a wetsuit, because you're going to be in the water a good hour or two. So it takes a lot of specialized training, gases, and equipment. Helium instead of air, trimix it's called. But in the end, a small group of divers started to dive it. But other than that, it was kind of lore out there. It was like an unreachable wreck that everybody wanted to do. Until the year 2000. In the year 2000, NOAA and the Thunder Bay Marine Sanctuary opened up. Very first one in the Great Lakes. And with it, they decided to start exploring the local wrecks. And right at the top of the list, even though it was outside the sanctuary boundaries at the time, they now have expanded the boundaries, the Windiate popped to the top. And in 2002, they got their opportunity to dive it, because this gentleman, Robert Ballard, how many know about Robert Ballard? Yeah, he's the guy who found the Titanic. He came in to the Great Lakes with the RV Connecticut as part of the Institute of Exploration, and they were going to work with NOAA to survey some of these shipwrecks. And the Windiate was one of the ones that NOAA and Thunder Bay wanted to look at. Now, of course, at the time, NOAA divers could not do these depths. They were limited by scientific diving protocols. It's all different now. They dive these wrecks all the time now. But at the time, they couldn't put divers on like the recreational tech divers were doing. And so what they were going to do instead was use this, the little Hercules. It's an ROV, and it's little for the early thousands, but it had high definition video, brand new at the time, state of the art, and a tether leading up to the boat. You got to launch it with a crane. It's not something you do off a small boat. But this was going to try to get good video of the Windiate. There was only one problem. The Windiate has standing masts and rigging hanging down, and it's really risky to get that close. So in the end, they only decided they were going to approach from the stern, which was the easiest way to get there and not foul that tether in the wreck by accident. And they were going to get some video, do the best they could. And this is what they got. This is video from their 2002 dives. You can actually see two little lasers here. That's actually so they can get an idea for spacing. That's what those little two red dots are. And this is the cabin right here. Looking from the stern, the wheel would be right here. This is the boom for the mizzen mast, the gaff for the mizzen mast. And this is a companionway with a spiral staircase going down into the cabin. And look at that. You can see the boards. So you can see the windows. That's, you can see a little pipe there, stove pipe. And you can see how beautiful it is. There's a ceramic jug put by one of the tech divers that found it somewhere on the wreck, and he put it on the roof of the cabin. You can actually even see the sliding cover for the companionway there. I mean, gorgeous. Here's another view. Here's the wheel. It's actually tilted up with the steering gear right there. A little companionway here. Again, the boom and gaff. And this is the stern. These two things here would have held the lifeboat, the davits. They were little metal iron davits. But you can see it's a gorgeous ship. And this is all they really got. They didn't get a lot of great video of the entire ship, just the small part, but it was pretty cool. Now, I mentioned that there were divers diving the wreck already, from a recreational standpoint, at least, for fun. We pay to do this. We're not paid to do this. And there was a lady that was one of the divers that was doing that. Her name is Joyce Hayward, and she was, for those that knew her, a mover and a shaker. She was a force of nature to be reckoned with. She was wonderful, wonderful person. She was very active in diving. Once she got certified in the early 80s for diving, she formed her own dive club, the Bay Area Divers, which I'm a member of. She created the Shipwrecks and Scuba Show, which still goes on every year in Sandusky in November. And she was very involved in Great Lakes shipwreck preservation documentation. It's her that actually arranged the first archaeological survey on the Adventure in the North Bay of Kelly's Island. Brought in a gentleman by the name of Pat Laberty, which he'll come up again here soon. And they actually did the very first archaeological survey in Ohio waters of a ship. And she was regularly diving the Windiate. A group of us were going up every summer and diving a lot of the really pristine ships that are up there. And she was really inspired by the 2002 survey that Ballard had done. And she felt, it's disappointing they weren't able to do a lot. And she loved the Windiate. It was her favorite wreck. And she wanted to do more. So she decided we need to do a proper survey of the ship. Now, hopefully that would solve the mystery. What happened to it? How did it sink? Where are the people? Answer all the questions. And in order to do that, she needed some help. And NOAA Thunder Bay was very gracious. They actually gave her data from the 2002 expedition. And they actually gave her Pat Laberty, the marine historian, he knows everything about the Great Lakes and shipping. And he is a very talented individual, and he actually helped participate in the survey. She used a group of volunteers to do this, 20 people in total. At a time when this sort of deep diving was brand new, there were only a few people doing it. This is pretty much the entire group of people doing that sort of deep diving in the Great Lakes at the time. It was a very small group. There's not something even NOAA and their divers could do at that time. It's different now. And so the very first survey was done, and it was all volunteer. And this is really the first time that anybody had ever tried something like this. I mean, shallow water, sure, but nothing this deep. This is something entirely different. And it was a very challenging project as a result. But she put this together in under a year. The very next summer, for 2 months, these volunteers went out on their own time and money and did the survey of this ship. So let's take a look. Here's Joyce along with Pat Laberty, and they're sitting in the cabin of the Viking, one of the boats that participated in the surveys. You can see a slate here. Yes, you can write underwater. It just takes waterproof paper and a pencil, and you can write all you want. Of course, you have to have a lot of gases. This is mixed gas diving. So we were at a campground off the main road into Rogers City, and this is Dave Mecker, a Canadian, Don Ellerbrook, and they're mixing gases and filling tanks at the picnic table. They've got helium and oxygen, and they're filling the tanks, and then we'd go to the local dive shop and get air top-offs to complete the trimix. This is actually Joyce's tanks right here, the blue ones being filled. I recognize those. And this is where the boats have participated. Viking. This is Alan Jensen's boat Viking. Everybody would go down to Presqu'île Harbor. It was a harbor refuge, pretty close to the shipwreck, actually. Presqu'île is a wonderful area. It's got 2 lighthouses, very scenic area. And this harbor is very cute. You can see it's a foggy day on this particular day. Not unusual for that area, which is one of the reasons why there's so many shipwrecks. Ships kept hitting each other in the fog. Crazy. Especially in the 1800s with no radar, no radios. Ships just ran into each other all the time. In fact, almost every one of the ships off of Presqu'île sank in a collision. And then of course the fun part, loading all that gear onto the boat every morning. Lots of heavy tanks, stage bottles, survey equipment, all the safety gear that you need to be able to do this dive. This is Marty Bailey, one of the divers. And of course, go over the slates, get the slates ready. You can see the slates kind of ready, part of the survey sketch that we're doing. Go ahead, make sure what measurements do we need today, what do we need to do, and then everybody gets together, the divers for the day, and goes over the plan. Here's, again, some more people. There's Alan and Tim McLeod, and of course, Pat and Joyce. And then out to the shipwreck you go. Hopefully in the early morning before the waves get too big. Usually they kick up by the afternoon. Still a foggy day out there that day. There you can see another boat that's part of the survey, Wildcat out there. There's Alan taking his boat out. There's Wildcat, Jim and Pat Stayers, and they have another person aboard. I'm not sure who was aboard with them that day, but I definitely recognize Jim and Pat, his wife, and I'm not sure who that person is. Nevertheless, this was what we would do day after day after day for 2 months. And this is what we saw. Yeah, this is the bow. This is the standing foremast. Now, you can see a lot of stuff here, and this is looking up at the bow. So the bow is that way. And a couple of things. First of all, you'll notice all the wire rigging on the deck. The ship was wire rigged when it sank in 1875. And that wire rigging is still there. It's kind of fallen down most. There's still some hanging down from the foremast. I actually got caught in it once. Going up, I bumped my head on it. And you'll also see something in the pictures, this yellow line running through. That is actually the survey tape. You know, the way you do an archaeological survey is you run a centerline tape down the middle of the boat, and all your measurements are taken off of that, so you have a reference point. And you can see the deck is littered not just with the wire rigging, but there's a boom right here. You can see the windlass up there. The bow, this is the stem and the lake floor. Look at that, the bobstay chain kind of broken there. But it's just sitting on its keel. Yeah. It's beautiful. I mean, you can see the nails, the spikes, the wood, even a little bit of the paint. It's just a beautifully preserved ship. This is the foremast that you saw in the early picture. This is the fife rail around it. The belaying pins are still there. The mast hoops, which would have held the sails. This is how the sails slid up and down the mast. The sail is gone, the rope is gone, the fabric is gone, but everything else is there. And that's the beauty of Great Lakes shipwrecks. Wood is there, all the cargo, the grain is still there below deck. The only thing that's gone is the sail and the rope. And so all the mast hoops, when the sail went down, just kind of slid down the mast, and they're still there mixed with the wire rigging. And then, of course, our survey tape running through the middle. This is the capstan. You can see it's rusting a little bit, but not in bad shape, with a boom running behind it. This is the main mast at the center of the ship, another fife rail with belaying pins still in it. The mast hoops, you can see the boom and gaff stowed together on the rest. And this is the centerboard winch. All the ships back then, the sailing vessels, had drop-down keels called centerboards. And they would pull them up to go into shallow harbors and drop them down when they're under sail. And so this is the winch that would do that. And that chain would go down the hole, probably right there, and go down to the centerboard. And then, of course, if the ship sinks, the centerboard would just push up into the box. And on the other side of it, there's a hand pump, more of the fife rail. Like I said, you can see that stowed boom and gaff. There's the main cargo hatch with the cover and the band still in place. Those almost always blow off when things sink. Escaping air from the boat just blows those covers right off. It's really unusual to find hatch covers. This thing has everything. It's all there. Really, really well preserved. This ship looks like I said, you could pick it up and sail it away. Why it sank? We'll get to that. Here's something I've never seen on a shipwreck. Anybody know what it is? What? You said it.
Flower pot?
Flower pot. Okay, actually close, but no. So it's the meat locker. So think about this. This is days before refrigeration. But you got to feed the crew, right? So for things that would not keep well, you had a big box. It's actually the sides are thick because they're stuffed with hay. And then the interior is lined with thin metal, tin probably. And you would put ice and your perishable foods in there. There's a lid that's missing. You can see the hinges for it. And I've never seen one of these on the wrecks. This is almost the first thing that would just float away. It's filled with hay. It's relatively light. But here it is, sitting on the deck. It's incredible. Here's the cabin. You can see dead eyes and the chain plates that would have held the rigging. And there's the rigging for the mizzen mast at the stern. You can see the cabin behind. And you can even see the original white paint. I mean, this is incredible. The bars in the window, the shutter that would have slid closed, the little railing along the top. I mean, just gorgeous, gorgeous ship. And there's that spiral staircase that you saw in that little Hercules picture. You can see it actually spirals down into the cabin. It's just beautiful. This ship is just filled with all sorts of intricate little details. Really, really in great shape. And here's that upended wheel. And this is the survey tape, that centerline tape, and this is kind of where we hung it at the end of the survey, where it was last positioned so that we could take measurements. And you can just see this is a gorgeous ship. There was a little bit of theft. Some of the early tech divers were not unscrupulous, and they actually stole the 2 keyhole portholes that were on the stern, on the transom, which I really lament. I'd love to have seen what those look like. There are still decorative features. These are actually metal stars. The whole transom had an arch of metal stars. And along the periphery, it's not in this video, there was actually carved in rope braid that also outlined the transom. Thomas Windiate put a lot of detail, a lot of care into the ship. Little touches, artistic touches that you don't see in a lot of ships. This was, again, one of his prides and joy. And the stern of a regular ship would have looked like this. You notice no decorations or anything like that. There's those lifeboat davits. There's a lifeboat right there. This is the Granger of Chicago, probably, I'm going to assume, Chicago. But nevertheless, you can see this is a pretty similar configuration to what the Windiate would have looked like, minus the artistic touches. And you might guess, well, so the crew's missing. Maybe they took the lifeboat. No, the lifeboat's sitting on the bottom behind the wreck. So probably what happened was hanging off those davits with rope, and as the rope eventually degraded, the boat just dropped down. It's actually a little off the starboard side, but the yawl is there. You can see one of the blocks that would have connected to the davits. The seats are there. Everything is pretty much there. So they did not take the lifeboat, which only adds to the mystery. The only damage on the ship is at the bowsprit. The bowsprit is broken. It should stick out like this, and instead it comes up like this. And you can see it shattered, and you can see it here going by. This is probably the result of those accidents that it had right before leaving. Those temporary repairs did not hold. Whatever they were, lashing with rope or whatever they did not hold. And that's probably why it's damaged. I'm sure the ice did not help weighing it down, but nevertheless, this is it as far as damage. The hull is completely attacked all the way around. No holes, no planks missing, nothing. The only other damage to the ship is the very top of the main mast and the mizzen mast are snapped off before you get to the cross trees. But that's about it. And again, that could be due to the weight of the ice and things like that. And certainly wouldn't have caused it to sink. The foremast, however, the very front mast, goes all the way up. And you can look up from the deck, and this is what you see. And you see that spar there? Remember I mentioned that Rafi spar? Well, this is it. And the swivel that held it, still there. There's some of that hanging rigging I was talking about, still there. And of course, this is what it would have looked like back in the day. This is the Rouse Simmons, which, by the way, is a shipwreck now in Lake Michigan. It's called the Christmas tree ship. It sank with a load of Christmas trees on the way to Chicago. And you can see the top sails, all the regular type things. But this is kind of unique to Great Lakes ships. And that Rafi spar is still there on the foremast since 1875 when it sank. Really cool. There is one museum ship out there called the Dennis Sullivan. It's my favorite Great Lakes tall ship, and it also has a Rafie. It's about as close as you can get to a Great Lakes ship. Still sailing on the Great Lakes today. And if you go higher, here's the cross trees I've been mentioning, with the standing rigging coming in and a little bit of the top mast and the steps. That's those little square things there going up. And if you look closely, you can actually see the mooring line. Does anybody see it? That little line right there. That's the mooring line. The way you would dive the ship is you get on the boat, you get geared up, get in the water, swim to the bow, follow the line down, and it takes you down to the top of the mast, right around 130 feet. And then you just follow the mast all the way down to the deck, which is around 175, 180 foot, and then do the deck. And then if you want, go down the bottom, look at the all boat. And then you go up the same way. And so all your decompression stops. You have plenty to look at until you get past 130 foot, which is really awesome. Usually it's pretty boring doing decompression. And this is what the slates would look like. This is what we were doing. We would go ahead, and you don't want to write. You only got 20 to 25 minutes on the bottom, and then you're going to spend another 40 to 50 minutes decompressing out. So you don't have a lot of time to write. So you'd fill out the slates ahead of time with things, and then all you would do is take the measurements and write the dimensions down. Sped things up greatly. You got it. Time is of the essence. Here's a diver in the water you can see stage bottles. There's the measuring tape. There's the slate. You got the wrist slate for the decompression schedule, the tanks, a lot of gear. And when you're doing surveying, it's even more gear. You got the slate and the measuring reel as well. And from all of this data, you can put together what the ship looks like in a very accurate plan view. And this is what was the result. This is what Joyce's survey came up with. And there it is. It's a complete drawing of this wreck, on at least the deck, an overhead view. It did not answer why the vessel sank. You can see the snapped off mizzen mast here with the shrouds and the snapped off top of the main mast. But again, no damage all the way around, deck's intact. There's no reason why the ship should have sank. The only thing is if you notice the anchor chain is pulled out of the anchor locker and run back and forth along the port side. At the time it was thought, well, maybe they got trapped in the ice, and so they ran the chain out to try to even the ship out. And then when that didn't work, they decided to walk to shore. The yawl boat's no use if you're locked in ice. It's just more to drag. And so they walked ashore and for whatever reason never made it. That was the speculation. That's the only thing that the survey could really come to any sort of conclusion on. And that plan view has been used everywhere now. You see it everywhere. This is NOAA's website today. You can see they've kind of simplified it a little bit, but there it is. You see the all boat. And they even built a model. Part of the survey is NOAA actually commissioned a well-known model builder, Ted McCutcheon, to build a model of the ship based on the survey. So this is his very accurate replica of what the Windiate would have looked like in real life. Beautiful ship, and it's up there in NOAA and the Thunder Bay area. Here's the bow. This is what it would have looked like with the anchors still hanging on the catheads, standing mast. There's the stern with the cabin. Just gorgeous. And there's the yawl the way it should be hanging off the stern. And they also commissioned 2 paintings as part of the survey. Robert McGreevy, a very talented maritime artist for the Great Lakes region, he did one with the Windiate under sail, and then one what the Windiate looks like in the bottom. There is one mistake in that painting. Bowsprit's intact. It's not. But other than that, it's really accurate. It's very close to what the ship actually looks like. And you can see why this is such a lure for divers. I mean, this is Great Lakes history, intact, on the bottom. It's better than any museum. So word got out, and people started coming. And in 2005, a couple years later, 1 year later, these 2 gentlemen showed up. Now, how many people know Richie Kohler and John Chatteron? Few. So how many people have heard of shadow divers? That's where there was a German U-boat off of New Jersey discovered in the 1980s and 90s, and nobody could identify it. And there's no German U-boats off of New Jersey in 230 foot of water. Why would there be a U-boat where no U-boat should be? It's called the U-Who for a long time. These 2 gentlemen actually eventually identified it. And it turned out a sub they thought sunk off of Gibraltar was actually the sub that was sunk off New Jersey. It was a paperwork error. Nevertheless, they made their name. All sorts of books, shadow divers come out, The Last Dive, Deep Descent, All these books have been written about their identification of the Yoo-hoo, the German submarine off of New Jersey. Well, they got an offer to do a TV show for a while called Deep Sea Detectives, and they came out in 2005 and filmed in Presqu'île. Actually, Joyce and the gang, we were all there when they showed up. We actually gave them pointers on what to look for and how to film. And they eventually came out that next spring in 2006 with Great Lakes Ghost Ship, which aired. And I think they actually nailed what happened. They actually did tow tank tests with a model of the Windiate. And what they did was they proposed that ice that was on the ship, remember I showed you that picture? The weight of the ice constantly accumulating, the ship started to ride lower and lower and lower in the water. And you got to remember, it's a slippery deck. One by one, as the deck becomes washed over, people get washed overboard. And pretty soon you have a ship completely cased in ice with nobody aboard, and it slowly settles to the bottom, all still encased in ice, which is why everything is still there, including hatch covers, that meat locker, everything, the boom and the gaff still on the mainmast under the rests, because the ship sank encased in ice. And it just slowly settled in the water with the crew slowly washing off as the ship journeyed until finally it sank and settled very slowly at the bottom. The ice melts and you have a perfectly preserved ship. The ice did obviously do some damage to the bowsprit and the top masts of the main and mizzen, but I think their case actually is probably the best for what happened. Why did the ship sink and what happened to the crew? That anchor chain that you saw pulled out along the port side, turns out that's a standard procedure. If you don't want your chain to foul in the locker, you pre-run it out on the deck, talking to sailors later, so that when you drop it, so they were thinking about dropping an anchor at some point, but probably it all got frozen onto the deck and that wasn't going to work either. But nevertheless, that chain pulled out is just preparation for anchoring, where you don't foul your chain. Nevertheless, I think that they nailed it. I will point out the ship was overloaded. It was only rated for 15,000 bushels. It was carrying 21,000. That is not unusual. There was no such thing as a plimsoll mark back in the day. And you packed on as much cargo as you thought you needed to make money. And for that last run of the season, they put on way more than they should have. It's really right up to the deck beams when you peek in through little cracks in the deck. The grain is still there, the wheat's still there. Of course, NOAA did more photo mosaics and things. They've done a lot with the ship since then. Here's a photo mosaic where divers with a sled go back and forth and take pictures and then stitch them together. Boy, this is a lot easier than doing 2 months of measuring. This is so nice. Look at that. You get a really good view of what the deck actually looks like. It's photographs instead. But of course, technology's improved even more. Now there's something called photogrammetry. I don't know if you've seen it. It's being used everywhere, from geology to architecture to shipwrecks. That's where you take that photo mosaic and now the computer, special programs, stitch it together into a cloud model. This is actually a three-dimensional computer model that you can rotate, zoom in, zoom out, and you can actually see the ship in full, not just the plan view from the top, the whole ship, sides, everything. They usually don't get the masts. The masts are always missing. But this is even better. I mean, again, this can be done in just a few dives instead of weeks and weeks of diving. But guess what? The technology's got even better. Now there's people like, there's one lady who's doing photogrammetry. She's world famous. And you want to see her photogrammetry? There you go. Isn't that awesome? I mean, Becky Kagan-Schott is amazing. She did this in one dive. One dive on a rebreather, she did this, all of this. That's incredible. This is how good the technology's gotten. There's now a project to document every Great Lakes ship using photogrammetry. There's several people out there doing it right now. Every season they're out there, and in one dive you can get a whole ship, down to the millimeter almost. It's incredible. And by the way, this is a three-dimensional model. If I had a computer here, I could zoom in, zoom out, rotate it, and you could even print it out on a 3D printer and make a little desk model of it if you wanted. Yeah, I mean, cool. I want one of those. They're very, very expensive, but I want one. This is what we've gotten to. And so from this standpoint, it's incredible how far things have come in just a few decades. But the Windiate keeps coming up because the Windiate really is an incredible ship. And how many people here would like to walk on the Windiate's deck? Well, you actually can. So this is the NOAA Museum in Alpena. And if you go there, This opened in the summertime and a little bit in the winter, shortened hours. But if you go inside in their lobby, they have a ship built, at least the stern. And they called it, I don't know why, the Western Hope of Alpena, very controversial. They should have called it the Windiate because everything's based on the Windiate. Those stars, the portholes are a little different. The lifeboat, the yawl. You can actually sit in the yawl if you want to. And you can walk the deck. You can steer the ship. There's the boom and gaff stowed the way it was with those mast tubes that I was talking about. This is as close as you could get to being on the Windiate. It's incredible, and I'm really glad they did this when they built the museum. They actually used all that survey data to build this ship model in their lobby. It's the first thing you see when you walk in.
How far was this from the shore?
So the Windiate is about 5 miles from shore, 185 feet of water. But this is the best thing. If you can't dive that deep, just go to the museum. So I would like to acknowledge Joyce. She, like I said, is no longer with us, but she was a mover and a shaker. And this talk is really her talk. She and the Windiate kind of share a history together. This is all the survey divers that helped her out, a whole group of them, at a time when that was new technology, and now you can see how far the technology has come. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take some. Any questions? Yeah, you can turn the lights on now. Yes?
So it didn't crash to the bottom. It had to sink very slowly.
So the question is, or the statement is, yeah, it didn't crash to the bottom. It did sink very slowly. I think that's actually part of how, because a lot of these ships, especially if they were heavily loaded with like iron ore or even coal, they usually crash into the bottom. The bow is just blown open, or the stern is cracked open, depending on which way they hit. This ship, I think, was encased enough in ice that it just slowly settled to the bottom, because ice is pretty buoyant, but it was enough to weigh the ship down for the parts that are above water, to the point where the decks were awash, water started to come in through, whatever openings there was, and the ship just kept settling lower and lower. Eventually the decks were awash, then submerged, and the ship just slowly lowered to the bottom. That's my supposition, and that's actually what the deep sea detectives pretty much came to the conclusion as well.
No bodies ever washed ashore, even they were frozen or something?
So the question is, what happened to the bodies? Yeah, they never washed ashore. None have ever been found. Joyce actually wanted to do a survey between the ship and the shoreline, again under the conjecture that they tried walking ashore. But I don't think she would have found anything, because now, first, it's very hard to find a body in 200 feet of water over miles and miles. But even more importantly, I think they're far behind the boat. And yeah, once the bodies sink, you got to remember, Lake Erie is a little different than the rest of the Great Lakes. The bottom temperature on the Great Lakes is 38 degrees year-round, and all except for Lake Erie. Lake Erie being shallow, you can actually get colder. 38-degree water is the densest. 32-degree water floats on top of 38-degree water. And once you get 38 on the bottom of a deep lake, it never warms up. And so what happens is the decompression, or the decomposition of bodies that float them, which happens in Lake Erie pretty readily, and other shallower bodies of water, doesn't happen in the Great Lakes. As they say, Lake Superior doesn't give up its dead. Well, neither does Lake Michigan or Lake Huron or Lake Ontario, unless they're really close to shore. And so those bodies are still out there somewhere, probably on the bottom. Not to be gruesome.
Was an ROV sent into the cabin so we could see what the inside of the cabin was like?
So the question was the ROV sent into the cabin? No, it was not. Little Hercules was way too big for that. Divers have been inside. I've been inside. There isn't a whole lot to see. It's a lot of fallen walls, some furniture. The stove is in there. But there isn't a whole lot to see, and concerns about damage to the wreck, you try not to go in the cabin because you're just going to do damage trying to move around. I'm sure people have thought about sending ROVs in, but I don't know anybody that has. Any others? Oh, okay, thank you.